Welcome into Words with Wallace. I'm your host, Nick Wallace. Coming at you, it's Friday, June 26th, and we're coming off of an absolutely loaded week in the NBA. We finally got an end to the year-long, maybe even more than that, Giannis trade saga on Monday night when he was traded to the Miami Heat. The Celtics firmly entered the Giannis discussions and came up short, which leaves them in a tough spot with Jaylen Brown being very much available according to a bunch of different reports. So we got to talk about what's next for the Celtics. We had another surprise trade yesterday when LaMelo Ball was traded to the Minnesota Timberwolves. Can't wait to break that one down. And of course, it was NBA draft week. I think you guys know by now the draft is not necessarily my strong suit just because I'm not watching a ton of college basketball, but we are going to review the top picks in the draft, give you guys my quick winners and losers. You guys can take that with a grain of salt. And then finally, at the end of the podcast, we are going to go through some of the other free agent news that we have, really all just extensions at this point in the calendar. And we have a couple other smaller trades to discuss as well as we head into the official start of the free agency period next week. So again, loaded podcast for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoy. So obviously the headliner for today's podcast is going to be the Giannis trade that finally went through late on Monday night, in which Giannis and Bobby Portis were sent out to the Miami Heat. In return, the Bucks received Tyler Herro, Kel'el Ware, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Yakachunas, their first-round pick last year, the number 13 pick in the 2026 NBA draft, which ended up being Nate Ament, first-round picks in 2031 and 2033, which are unprotected, a first-round pick swap in 2030, and a second-round pick in 2033. So like I mentioned, this trade broke late on Monday night, and honestly, when it happened, I was extremely bummed out. I talked about it a little bit at the tail end of my last podcast, but I had fully done a 180 since the end of the regular season for my Celtics, and I was really hoping the Celtics were going to be the ones to come out on top in this Giannis bidding war. I was very much aware that Jaylen Brown was going to be a part of that package, but at this point, I didn't care. I wanted to see the Celtics maximize their window to win over the next couple of seasons. So when the news came out late on Monday night, again, I was super bummed out. There was a Chris Haynes report that came out I think 2 hours before the deal finally broke, where Chris Haynes went on national TV and basically said that Boston was a very heavy front runner to land Giannis at that time. And I guess Chris Haynes has some family ties to Giannis, so I just thought it was pretty funny that he could not have been more wrong and announced that news that Boston was the front runner right before Giannis was actually dealt to the Heat. So either he's just a pretty shitty reporter, or some people online are theorizing that it could be a little bit sketchier than that because he's one of those guys with some sort of Kalshi or Polymarket partnership. So very nice of him to completely shift the betting odds in favor of the Boston Celtics just for the Bucks to go out and deal him to the Heat. So I'll put my bitching to the side and kind of zoom back in on the package for the Miami Heat. And given the current market for Giannis, or lack thereof, I would say that this is a B- level return for the Milwaukee Bucks. I think they could have done a lot better if they had shipped Giannis out last offseason, or maybe even 4 months ago, 5 months ago at the trade deadline. I just feel like there had to have been better packages out there, because then at least you would have gotten a year and a half of Giannis under contract guaranteed. We very much expect a Giannis max extension coming in the next few days now that he is a member of the Miami Heat. But putting all that to the side, just diving into the return for the Bucks a little bit more. Tyler Herro, I think we know what he is at this point. He's a phenomenal shooter. He's a pretty great scorer. He's not the most durable. That's a real concern. And obviously there are some defensive shortcomings as well. He is from Milwaukee for what that's worth. So at least the Bucks are able to market him as a hometown guy. It's a homecoming of sorts. And at least there's something for the team and their marketing department to work with as far as a guy to put on the posters. It's not great when you look at other teams around the league and what their best player is looking like, but at least Tyler Herro, I think he made the All-Star team maybe the season before. And I think he can actually fill it up even more so in Milwaukee if he has the green light compared to what he was doing with the Miami Heat. Kel'el Ware might be the best asset from this entire deal, just at his height being 7'2", 7'3", the ability to protect the rim, space the floor. He moves really well for a guy of that size. He's not at a Wemby level, but honestly, he might be the closest thing we have to Wemby, at least in the NBA currently. And I just feel like the fit next to Bam Adebayo was pretty weird. Spoelstra kind of struggled getting those guys to mesh offensively. And so Kel'el Ware's minutes fluctuated a lot in Miami, and that's why his counting stats don't look anything that crazy. But I think the guy has a huge ceiling. I think he should definitely immediately get the keys as the starting five for the Milwaukee Bucks, even if they hold on to Miles Turner. I mean, that guy was just so disappointing last year. He's older. His best years behind him. So if you're the Bucks, you want to see what you have in Kel'el Ware. Jaquez is coming off a season where I thought he actually should have won Sixth Man of the Year, even though that award ended up going to Keldon Johnson. He was a really nice source of offense, and his style of play was a really fantastic fit with what the Heat were running for the vast majority of last season. That being said, like, he was older when he got drafted. He had a really great rookie season. Then he kind of came back down to earth his second year. So I don't think he's any type of elite asset. I think he's already like the best version of himself. We've already seen it with Jaime Jaquez. I wouldn't be surprised if he never touches the stats that he got to last year in Milwaukee, depending on how many minutes he gets. But he is a really nice player, plays a lot bigger than what he is. Jakubonis didn't play a ton last year for the Miami Heat, despite them taking him in the first round at pick number 20 last year. But I know a lot of guys were really high on him as a prospect. He definitely has a great ceiling as a shooter as well. So there is some upside there. At pick 13, we're going to spend more time on this when we talk about the draft. They took Nate Ament, who guys have a lot of mixed feelings about, but he moves really fluid for a guy of his size. And so I think that's worth the upside swing. And finally, the picks in 2031 and 2033, those are both unprotected Miami Heat picks that are going to the Milwaukee Bucks. It's going to take a while for those to convey. Like, obviously, we're talking 5 and 7 years out for those picks, but at least they are unprotected. And at that point, if Giannis is still on the Miami Heat at that point, which is very much up in the air, he's going to be 36 and 38 years old in those seasons. So obviously, the upside for those picks being like lottery picks or maybe even better than that is really, really high. So that's not a terrible return there. I could really care less about the pick swap in 2030 and the second round pick. That's just kind of whatever. So that's the foundation of the package. I think it's solid. At least the Bucks got a pool of assets. It just sucks that none of those guys are truly elite right now. But if Kel'el Ware levels up, if Tyler Hero has his best season yet, this deal isn't going to look as awful as what it could have looked like had there not been a little mini bidding war between Boston and Miami. Now, the package that the Boston Celtics offered, according to Shams Charania, was Jaylen Brown plus 2 unprotected first-round picks, which honestly, I was a little surprised that the Celtics were going to be willing to put in that much more on top of Jaylen Brown. I felt like their values could be a little bit closer to even. Obviously, Giannis is a way better player when he's healthy, but that being said, he is a little bit older. He's a little bit less durable. He's really only under contract for next season, so you immediately have to give Giannis a supermax extension, whereas Jaylen still has 3 years left on his deal. So even if you trade for Jaylen Brown, you don't necessarily have to extend him right away. But all that being said, I totally get why Giannis would command more value just because of his ceiling as a player. And I actually think that the Celtics package is a little bit better than what the Miami Heat offered for Giannis. That being said, I also understand why the Bucks would not necessarily want Jaylen Brown. Like, I don't really know what Jaylen Brown is doing for you. Best, you're going to be like a very low seed that just sneaks into the playoffs in the Eastern Conference either way. So instead of getting Jaylen Brown, you'd much rather more draft picks and younger assets that are more desirable. But that being said, if the Bucks were really crafty, they would have been able to take that offer from the Boston Celtics and then find a third team to take on Jaylen Brown. You get those 2 free picks from the Boston Celtics, and then maybe you're able to turn Jaylen Brown into Trey Murphy and Herb Jones and a couple other Pelicans picks, which might be desirable. And that's just one example of a potential Jaylen Brown trade. Now, I do wonder if that third team was as easy as to find as I'm making it sound, because obviously the Celtics and the Bucks were, I think, both open to that type of deal, and they were obviously working on this since the season ended, and they weren't able to work that out, and that's probably why the Bucks landed on taking that Heat offer. So all in all, I don't hate that the Milwaukee Bucks just finally decided to stop dragging this out and just pull the trigger on the Miami offer on Monday night. Now, taking a look at what this means for the Miami Heat, obviously if Giannis is healthy because of his ceiling as a player, I think the Heat are going to be better than what they were last year, but I don't really think I'm being a hater by saying they really aren't scaring me as a Celtics fan. I don't think they're a real threat to come out of the East, at least not how it currently stands. I mean, that roster is just so thin, and I even saw some people online trying to like zag and defend some of the guys on the Heat bench, and I'm not saying that they're all bums, but just like look at the backcourt. Like, I like Davion Mitchell probably more than consensus. I think he's a dog on defense, and offensively, he's really hit his stride with the Heat compared to where he was in previous stops. But him and Drew Smith are really like the only guards that we know anything about on this roster at this point in time. And Drew Smith is kind of like a whatever bench guard coming off a pretty significant injury a couple years ago. So I think both of those guys are pretty firmly below average for starting guards in the NBA and bench guards in the NBA. The thing that's really going to screw over the Heat is that it looks very likely that they're going to lose Norm Powell in free agency. If they were able to retain him, then I would definitely think of this team as a threat to win the East. And Norm Powell obviously was an all-star last year. I love Norm Powell as much as the next guy. I think that was gassing it a little bit, but they desperately need somebody to handle the ball and create their own shot on offense. They also need as much shooting and floor spacing as humanly possible. I think Powell would be their best option on both of those fronts. But Brian Windhorst is reporting that it's unlikely that the Heat are going to be be able to afford Norm Powell, and he's expecting Norm to sign with another team in free agency. Their only backup big is going to be Bobby Portis, who's also coming over in this deal. They have some decent wings with Wiggins and Larson and Jovic, I guess, but they basically don't have any perimeter shooting. And they still have a ton of work to do, in my opinion, to fill out the rest of the roster. Now, the Heat over the years have been very crafty at like hitting on second round picks and finding guys to just fill out the rotation. I mean, they've been doing that since like the LeBron Big Three era in Miami over a decade ago. But even if they do a decent job of that, in my opinion, with how things currently stand, they're still well behind the Knicks, the Cavs, the Celtics, the Pistons, and probably even the Pacers, in my opinion. Now, again, that's open to change. We'll see how free agency shakes out, but I'm not suddenly treating the Heat as some major threat to come out of the East just because they were able to pull off this Giannis trade. Now, let's shift the focus back to my Boston Celtics because it feels like they have absorbed the burden that the Milwaukee Bucks were under, where there was all this pressure for the Bucks to move their star player. Suddenly we're in the same exact situation with Jaylen Brown because it's widely reported that Jaylen Brown was in that package for Giannis. Everybody knew that that had to be the case. It was very public. It was also widely reported that there was purely a bidding war between the Celtics and the Heat leading up to the trade on Monday night. And that probably pissed Jaylen Brown off. And I do understand why he would be pissed off because it's not like this is the first time that we tried to trade the guy. We've tried to trade him for Jimmy Butler. We tried to trade him for Paul George. We tried to trade him for Kawhi Leonard. We tried to trade him most recently for Kevin Durant. And then finally, after his best individual season, we immediately try to ship him out for Giannis. So if this is coming from Jaylen and he's the one that's really pissed off driving this, like I would honestly understand. I feel like Celtics fans and myself included are a little fed up with Jaylen and all the Twitch bullshit he's been doing this off season. So maybe the feeling is just mutual, but it is worth noting that apparently Jaylen hasn't requested a trade. That was reported yesterday as well. And it was also reported that the reason why the Bucks ended up taking the offer from the Miami Heat is that the Celtics were unwilling to add additional young assets to the trade, including guys like Hugo Gonzalez, Baylor Shireman, guys of that ilk. And I understand why Brad Stevens wouldn't want to give those guys up. I think both of those guys showed flashes in their first couple seasons. But that being said, the Celtics are now in a really bad spot. Like they clearly were going all in for Giannis. Everybody knows that Jaylen Brown was available. And now it's being widely reported that the Celtics are engaged in purposeful trade conversations with several other teams around the league involving Jaylen Brown. So the Celtics are now feeling some heat to just offload Jaylen Brown. And given that this Giannis deal happened on Monday night and now it's Friday afternoon and there still hasn't been a deal, tells me that the market for Jaylen Brown isn't that hot, which makes a ton of sense. We saw that the Giannis market only had two serious teams at the end of the day for a guy as good as Giannis. So why would the market for Jaylen Brown be that much different? And if there really isn't a good plan B as like what we're seeing unfold this week, why wouldn't we just be willing to part ways with Hugo or Baylor Shireman or whatever? Like I love those guys as much as the next guy. I thought they were really impressive during large stretches of last season and both of them were huge reasons why the Celtics were able to have such an impressive regular season despite missing Jason Tatum. But at the end of the day, Hugo Gonzalez averaged 3 points and 4 rebounds. If he is the guy that ended up preventing the Celtics from getting Giannis without there being a solid backup plan, then I'm going to be pissed. At that point, with every day, with every hour that goes by, I kind of wish we just ponied up and threw in those extra assets so the Bucks were to pull the trigger on our offer instead. And now the Celtics are again in this precarious spot. They're fielding all these other offers. There haven't been any real updates to the reporting here. Like Shams has basically been saying the same thing for like 3 or 4 days on Jaylen Brown since Monday night, just that he's available and that there's no guarantee that a deal is going to happen, but they're engaged with these talks in multiple teams. So where can the Celtics actually go from here? And I'm purely speculating on other teams that might be interested, but I know the Atlanta Hawks originally were mentioned as a team that could potentially slide into the Giannis deal as a third team to take on Jaylen Brown. But honestly, I really don't have any interest in the package that the Hawks would be reasonably willing to offer for Jaylen Brown. Like it would probably include Dyson Daniels, Okongwu. Maybe if you're lucky, you can get Kingston Flemings, the guy that they just took at number 8 in the draft, and maybe some other future picks as well. But I'm really not moved by that offer if I am the Boston Celtics. Same thing for the Blazers. They had a couple of Bucks picks, so they were reported as a team that could have slid in and taken on Jaylen Brown in a potential 3-team Giannis trade. But again, I don't really have that much interest in Shaden Sharp or Scoot Henderson or Jeremy Grant and any of those Blazers picks, like waiting for those to convey. Like don't have a ton of interest there. Even if it's Klingon, like I know theoretically Klingon is a really great asset on paper, but I've been very bearish on him since the start of his career. He just moves very awkwardly. I'm never going to believe that jump shot in the playoffs, and that'd be a really interesting player for the Celtics to take on that I would not be buying. I mean, I will say if the Clippers are for some reason interested in Jaylen Brown and we can get Kawhi Leonard plus additional assets, and we would definitely need additional assets because Kawhi is significantly older, the durability concerns, all that stuff. And really, you never know what's going on with Kawhi Leonard. Like, you cannot feel confident about him signing an extension with any team until it actually happens because his camp has just been so unpredictable over the years. I think my favorite package for Jaylen Brown that's possible is what the Pelicans can offer. That package that I mentioned before of potentially Trey Murphy, Herb Jones. Maybe we can squeeze out Derek Queen as well. You'd probably have to have Jordan Poole in the deal just to make the salaries work, and he is on an expiring contract. And then you'd obviously want as many Pelicans picks as humanly possible. Even with the Pelicans getting Jaylen Brown, that organization has just been so poorly run over the past decade that like I will happily place my bet on those Pelicans picks being higher than what you might think. There were actually rumors earlier in the week of there being a potential Jaylen and Mobley swap with the Cavs and Celtics being engaged in trade conversations. And while that might actually make positional sense for both teams, I don't love Mobley. I've never been a Mobley guy either, and I'm probably just sounding like very whiny and very picky for Jaylen Brown, who apparently nobody in the league is interested in right now. But I'm just not sold on Mobley's offense. I know he hasn't developed the way people hoped on that end of the court. And honestly, even if the Cavs were interested in making that swap, I have no idea what their mindset would be on this. I don't really foresee us trading Jaylen Brown to another good team in the East. Like, it's very likely that we would end up matching up with the Cleveland Cavaliers in the playoffs. And I just feel like that's something that Brad Stevens in the front office would like to avoid. So, all things told, I think that this is just extremely embarrassing for the Celtics, to be totally honest. We aggressively entered the Giannis market just to come up short, and now we seem like we're desperate trying to trade a guy that's homegrown in Jaylen Brown, our most recent finals MVP. And I'm obviously open to moving him for the right package, but I don't think it's out there. And I would much rather see Brad Stevens just literally publicly apologize to Jaylen Brown for trying to trade him again, rather than taking a trade package for Jaylen Brown that's just 50 cents on the dollar. Because most likely, whatever trade package we land on with Jaylen Brown is not going to be similar to Giannis, where we are then getting the best player in the deal. We would probably be trading away Jaylen Brown, like a tearing down of sorts, where we're taking on worse players, but we're also getting younger assets, more draft picks, more financial flexibility, all that stuff that's important. But if we're trying to maximize this window over the next 2 to 3 years, I feel like Giannis was really the only way to do that if Jaylen Brown was going to get traded. So not getting the Giannis deal done on behalf of Hugo feels like it's aging worse by the day, by the hour, like I mentioned before. And I still trust Brad Stevens, but this is an awful look for the team. I cannot lie about that. So all things told, if you zoom out and you look at how this Giannis trade went down and the three teams that were primarily involved, I think you got to be thrilled if you're the Pacers or the Cavs or really any other competitive team in the Eastern Conference specifically, because the Bucks look significantly worse in the short term, and I don't think that they ultimately maximize the return that they got for Giannis. Like, yes, they got a decent package, but they're not suddenly a threat because of the return that they got from Giannis. They have a long rebuild ahead. Giannis ends up going to the Miami Heat, obviously, and I still don't think that team is that scary for all the reasons that I laid out before. And then finally, Boston inserts himself into the deal, and now they have egg on their face, and they're the ones trying to salvage the relationship with their star player. So I think the Bucks, the Heat, and the Celtics can all come out as losers in this transaction. So all the other teams in the East have to be pretty happy with how this played out. Let's keep it moving to the other blockbuster trade that honestly came out of nowhere yesterday, and that was between the Minnesota Timberwolves and the Charlotte Hornets. In this deal, the Timberwolves received LaMelo Ball and Josh Green, and in return, the Hornets received Naz Reid, an unprotected 2033 first round pick, as well as first round pick swaps in 2028, 2029, and 2030, and then second round picks in 29, 32, and 33. Now, before we dive into the LaMelo trade, I do just want to quickly note that the reason that this was possible for the Wolves to go out and acquire LaMelo Ball is because they also basically salary dumped Julius Randle a couple days before in a deal that sent Randle to the Nets at the price of the Wolves just moving back 5 picks in the draft late in the first round and into the early second round just to get off of Julius Randle. And in that move, Nick Claxton also was sent to Chicago. To talk about that Randle move real quick, I kind of understand it for the Nets because Randle should help them, at least in theory, stay out of like that relegation zone where it prevents the Nets from being a bottom three team in the NBA. But honestly, I think the Nets are in such a bad spot that they easily could end up in as a bottom three team next year either way. And Randall is making over $33 million the next 2 seasons, so the Wolves were just happy to get rid of that contract after Randall was just terrible in the playoffs 2 out of the last 3 seasons. I actually like the swing for the Bulls to basically give up nothing to get Nick Claxton, who does make $20 million a year the next 2 seasons, but I think he's a pretty good athlete, good rim protector, fits into the funky stuff that Chicago has going on right now. It's pretty sad to see Julius Randle's value fall that far, and it definitely gives us a final verdict as if we needed one on that Cat trade, where the Knicks obviously ended up winning the title. Cat was a big part of that. But you also have to keep in mind that the Wolves did gain a lot of financial flexibility by moving off of Karl Anthony Towns. And so even though the Knicks definitely won the trade, so to speak, I don't think the Timberwolves are in a completely awful situation. So to go back to the LaMelo trade, I think that this deal kind of came out of nowhere, and it was pretty surprising that LaMelo Ball was even available. I think the biggest indictment that you can say for the Charlotte Hornets is it doesn't seem like they shopped him around all that much. Like, I'm not saying it's as irresponsible as like the Luka trade, where you would assume that 29 other teams would be interested in Luka. I would say that at most there's probably like 5 or 10 teams that might be interested in LaMelo Ball, but point guards of his size with his talent level are pretty hard to find, especially if they're still younger and under contract. Like, I just thought it was pretty surprising that he was just dumped like that. And to go back to the package the Wolves gave up to get him, I don't think it was all that much. Like, I love Naz Reid. I think he's a phenomenal player. I think he's a playoff guy. I think he holds up on both ends of the court. And honestly, I think he can really shine in Charlotte. I do think there's like a 40% chance that Naz Reid has just been playing the wrong position his entire career. Like, we've kind of had him pegged as like a backup center behind Cat, behind Rudy Gobert, behind Julius Randle over the past several years in the Timberwolves. But like, he is so talented at 6'8". He's got a crazy handle on him, a bunch of different ways he can score. I think he's honestly more built to be a 3. It'll be interesting to see how often he's able to play that position for the Charlotte Hornets. So I like Naz Reid. He doesn't have the same ceiling potential as LaMelo Ball. And then you look at the draft compensation, like, yeah, sure, an unprotected pick in 2033, that's nice. It's nice to get any unprotected first round pick. And it's hard to forecast 7 years out, but the Timberwolves have been a pretty good organization, so you can't project that pick to be crazy valuable. But more so when you look at like the first round pick swaps in 28, 29, and 30, I just don't really see those picks conveying with how good the Wolves have been. And even if they do convey, like, I feel like you're only going to be moving up a couple spots in the draft, because I do think when you zoom out, both the Wolves and the Hornets have a pretty decent future. So these aren't like super valuable swaps by any means. And I can obviously care less about the 3 second-round picks that were thrown in there as well. So really, in my opinion, it ends up being LaMelo Ball and Josh Green for Naz Reid in a 2033 unprotected first round pick and some dressing on top. So all things told, I love this deal for the Timberwolves. It's definitely risky, but I've already talked about it in previous podcasts. I just didn't feel like the Wolves had that many opportunities for them to truly level up and get into that tier with the Thunder and the Spurs. And obviously, they're still not in those tiers. That's not what I'm saying. But I just think adding a guy that could be truly an elite point guard in LaMelo Ball at his size, with his shooting ability, the court vision, the pace that he plays with, I think he's going to make Anthony Edwards' life a lot easier. Their offense in the playoffs specifically became really predictable. Anthony Edwards saw a ton of double teams down the stretch in the regular season and the playoffs last year. LaMelo Ball should alleviate a lot of that pressure, and good point guards just aren't that easy to find. Not to mention the fact that LaMelo Ball and Anthony Edwards playing basketball together, I mean, they're just going to be league pass crack between just the highlights that we're going to get out of these two guys. The interviews and the post game are going to be very hilarious. Both very candid guys, to say the least, when they are interviewed. So I'm excited to see that. Now, it is worth calling out that the Wolves have had a busy past couple days. That wasn't the only move they made. They also extended Ayo Dosunmu to a 5-year, $112 million contract. So I will say, especially in the wake of this LaMelo trade, that deal feels a bit high for a guy that's either going to be coming off the bench or he's going to be undersized playing the 3, or I guess you can technically push Anthony Edwards to the 3 as well. I mean, I wasn't shocked that there was a significant market for Ayo with how strong he played really all of last season, and especially in the playoffs. Like, he was just nails in that Denver series, but maybe it was just Ayo taking advantage of a really flawed and banged up Denver team that was really weak defensively, especially at that point in the season. But either way, I think Dante DiVincenzo, that means that he's basically done for in Minnesota. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent after next season, but he is going to be out all of next season, most likely with that Achilles injury. But even still, they probably overpaid for Io quite a bit. I wonder what that starting lineup looks like if they just play the three guards together, if they bring in a guy like Terrence Shannon Jr. to start in the front court alongside Jaden McDaniels and Rudy Gobert. But either way, I do think that the Wolves have raised their ceiling quite a bit by going out and getting LaMelo Ball for a relatively cheap trade package. Now, even though I love it for the Wolves, I don't think it's like a total disaster for Charlotte. I just think they could have fetched a little bit more for LaMelo Ball. Like, did you talk to the Rockets and see what that was out there? I mean, Ime Udoka probably would have killed LaMelo Ball within the first week of the season, but I don't think Ime should necessarily be a lock to be in Houston either. But again, they're a team that's in need of a point guard, even with Fred VanVleet coming back. It's always worth putting in a call to the Pelicans to see if they're interested in the player because you know that they're willing to overpay. I feel like they could have gotten more for LaMelo, but either way, I do like Naz Reid. I think he's going to see a monster increase in his stats. I do hope that the Hornets end up moving on from Bridges, who's currently slotted in as their starting four. I just feel like Naz Reid would play his best basketball at the three, and if not at the four, because obviously the Hornets are going to be starting Kobe White, Con Knuppel, Brandon Miller, and I think that they should definitely start Musa Diabate as well. He was like a really good small ball five for them. I don't think Naz Reid's best position is at center, and I think you're getting more out of him offensively is if he's playing that 3-4. So hopefully the Hornets lock in that lineup, and it is nice of them to pick up some extra draft capital at Naz Reid. I don't know if it was worth it to give away the guy that's been your franchise player the past couple seasons, who I still think hasn't reached his ceiling as a basketball player. Now, it is worth noting maybe the Hornets know something that we don't about LaMelo Ball. I mean, they've had him in the building for a while. He does have, I guess, a little bit of off the court concerns, more so concerns with durability above anything else. So maybe you trust their judgment on it. I think the Hornets have really done a great job of turning it around. They did immediately extend Kobe White to a 3-year, $74 million contract right after the trade was completed. So you saw that one coming. Maybe they just felt like Kobe White could be 75% of LaMelo Ball and fit in with the personality of the team a little bit better, and that's why they decided to make the move. But it was just fascinating, the timing of the deal, for them to not really shop him around and for them to move on from LaMelo Ball after his best individual season and the best season team-wise that the Hornets have had in like many years. So curious timing. I would say it's a home run swing for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and I would say it's a C-plus level deal for the Charlotte Hornets if I had to put a grade on it. So let's keep it moving and discuss the NBA draft. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on it. I know it's a little ridiculous to not make the NBA draft the foundation of this podcast. I just feel like these offseason moves, these trades have been a little bit more interesting. And I do feel like, all things told, like, even though this could be a really good draft class, I don't think it was the most exciting draft. There was obviously some movement, some jockeying for picks later in the first round and all throughout the second round, but those moves usually aren't that impactful. And I felt like the early part of this draft was pretty chalk. So what I'm going to do is just kind of fly through the top 16 picks or so, give you guys what the selection was, what the team was, and give you guys my quick thoughts. Debansa obviously went number one to the Washington Wizards. I think that makes a lot of sense. Positionally, he's a great fit for the team. Slots in nicely in the front court next to Alex Sarr and Anthony Davis if they're able to mend that relationship and make sure that Davis stays under contract with the Wizards next season. And also fits in nicely to Trae Young, who we're going to talk about a little bit, and then Keyshawn George, Bilal Coulibaly. Like, it's all going to come together for Washington this year. He obviously has tremendous ceiling with just his size, with his athleticism. So he's been the favorite to be the number one pick for a while. So not a ton of thoughts there. Utah ends up pulling the trigger on Darren Peterson at number 2, despite the fact that they were linked to Debansa at times with that Utah connection. They were also linked to Cameron Boozer because Boozer's dad, Carlos Boozer, played for the Jazz and also has like some type of front office position with the Jazz. But leave it to Danny Ainge to just say fuck it and take the guy who he thinks has the highest ceiling. And I do think that Peterson has the highest ceiling once Debansa is off the board. Just a tremendous scorer. I think he got dragged way too much for the durability concerns and like the cramping stuff that he went through at Kansas last year. I think that was just a story that was blown way out of proportion. I feel like people are just treating it very differently because we are still early in this NIL era, and it just felt slimier that he was getting paid so much money and still missing those games. But whatever, man, I don't care. I think he's a great fit on that team. They also are kind of like a log jam at the front court position. And I know you don't want to draft for fit at the number 2 overall pick, but taking Cam Boozer when you already have Lauri Markkanen, Jaren Jackson Jr., and Walker Kessler as guys that I'm assuming all 3 of those guys are also keepers on the Jazz wouldn't make a ton of sense. So I am excited to see what Peterson does in Utah. I think the Grizzlies are in an awesome spot getting Cam Boozer at 3. I think in the wake of this John Morant situation, it does feel like that era in Memphis is coming to a close. They just drafted like a grown-ass man, very mature player in Cam Boozer who could easily end up being the best player in the draft. I mean, he's like an analytics machine. He's just been so productive his entire career. We've heard about this guy forever. Even though he's not like an A-plus level athlete, I think he has the highest floor of anybody in the draft, and he's just going to be a tremendous fit for Memphis. The Bulls, they're very happy just to be in the top four. They get Caleb Wilson out of UNC. Athletically, might be the most impressive guy in the entire drafts. I mean, the highlights look like a cross between Giannis and Sean Kemp. It's just out of control. There's concerns about the shooting, and he did have some weird quotes. I mean, he came out and straight up said that he wants to be better than MJ. I did get the chills a little bit when he got drafted, obviously at a UNC, and they have like the MJ music playing in the background. I thought that was a nice touch. So the Bulls really couldn't lose because they had the fourth pick in a draft where there was clearly a top four. The Clippers take Keaton Wagler at number 5. I think that made a lot of sense. This is a pretty guard-heavy spot in the draft now that the top 4 was off the board, and they took a guy that can still fit alongside Darius Garland, who's obviously a smaller guy. So you kind of figure that they probably wouldn't pick Acuff with that spot, but you could definitely make an argument for Acuff. Keaton Wagler is a bigger guard that can really fill it up. So I think that's a nice pick for the Clippers. The Nets, this one was a little surprising. We'll talk more about this one a little bit. They took Mikal Brown Jr. out of Louisville with number 6. Has more size than some of the other guards in this spot and can really shoot and score and fill up the box score, but he does have some injury concerns. I just felt like the Nets should have taken Acuff with this spot, but whatever, that's the decision that they made. The Kings, I think they're one of the big winners of this draft, just being able to stay at number 7. There was rumors that they were going to have to trade up to get Darius Acuff, but they didn't. Acuff fell to the Kings at 7, and they were very happy to turn in that selection. I think that that's an awesome opportunity for them to get a potential franchise player. I mean, who knows when the next time the Kings are going to be up this high in the draft with this new lottery system. They could be as high as 1 next year because I don't think they're going to be very good, or they could get screwed and end up at the back end of the lottery. But I think it's really smart for them to take Acuff. The Hawks, they got this pick from the Pelicans last year. They took Kingston Flemings at 8. I was a big fan of that pick. There's just so much value at the guard position. The Mavericks went with Merez Johnson Jr. at number 9. This was the first pick where I was like, didn't really see that one coming. I felt like you could make the argument he might have been the 3rd best prospect on his own team coming out of Michigan. But it is worth noting that 2 days before the draft, the Mavs hired former Michigan coach Dusty May as the head coach. So he clearly should have a pretty good pulse on that Michigan locker room and what guy would be the best fit for the Mavericks. Just not a really well-developed offensive game for Merez Johnson at number 9. I think the Mavs need a lot of pieces beyond Cooper Flagg. So it is interesting to see a guy that might play a similar position to Cooper Flagg, who they take at 9. So I didn't necessarily love that pick for the Mavs. You move on to the Bucks at 10. They take Braden Burries out of Arizona. I loved this pick. That's the direction I thought the Mavs should have gone at 9. I think that's a great pick for the Bucks. At 11, this was mocked all the way back through March. The Warriors end up taking Yaxel Lindenborg from Michigan. He's an older prospect, but he's already really polished as a defender, as an athlete, can score the ball quite a bit as well, should fit in really nicely in Golden State. At 12, the Thunder took Mara, another Michigan player, off the board here. He's the giant that's like 7'3" with a 9'9" standing reach. I think this was a really great landing spot. And it's really funny that you could poke holes in Mara because he only played like 20 minutes a game, even in college. But on such a loaded Thunder team, like he's not going to need to play much more than that in the NBA. And they're in a really unique spot where with all the draft capital that they have, all the great players on their roster, they can basically just take like a gadget player that is literally only getting drafted to help slow down Wemby and provide some insurance for Hartenstein. So I liked that. Mentioned it earlier in the podcast, but the Bucks came away with Nate Ament at pick number 13, the pick that they got in that Giannis trade. People are all over the place on his ceiling, on him as a prospect, but I think just the way he moves at his size like makes sense at that stage in the draft. I think he had probably the most upside left of anybody. So I'm completely comfortable with the Bucks using their 2nd first-round pick to grab a guy with that type of profile. At 14, the Hornets drafted Heinz Steinbeck. Apparently, he's a very tenacious rebounder out of Washington. I don't know much about him. Wasn't super familiar with Swain from Texas, who went to the Bulls at 15, but I will say he does have an interesting profile when I dug into it a little bit more. Has a lot of size at guard. Gets a lot of player comps to Josh Giddey, ironically enough. I do have concerns about the amount of shooting or lack thereof that the Bulls have heading into next season, but they have a ton of size, a ton of athletes. I think defensively, they could be a real problem with Swain, with Giddey, with Caleb Wilson, with Bazelis, with Claxton. I think that's just going to be a really funky team to watch, and I think at the very least, they'll be really fun on League Pass. And then finally, the last pick I'll call out here in the first round, the Oklahoma City Thunder traded up 1 pick to get Bennett Sturts from Iowa, and they traded 2 first-round picks just to move up 1 draft spot. Again, the Thunder, I can't really be in a position to criticize any of their moves. They just have so many picks. I thought it was kind of a lot to give up 2 second-round picks to move up one spot in the draft, especially considering I don't think the Grizzlies would have ended up taking Sturts, but maybe they got some info that that was the direction that the Grizzlies were headed. But Sturts just did everything for Iowa. I think he basically played every minute of every game. Is a really great shooter, even though he was on the ball most of the time. So he was kind of like low volume, despite how good the shooting stats are. But it just seems like he's a phenomenal basketball player that got pushed down the board a little bit because of his height, because of his athletic profile. But honestly, if the Thunder have their eye on him, they've had tremendous success with guards lately. So that makes me feel like Sturts is going to work out pretty well. So that's just how the start of the first round shook out. I'll quickly give you guys my winners and losers of the draft as well. Starting with the winners, I think my biggest winner is the Sacramento Kings. Like I mentioned before, just not having to move up to get Acuff. Everyone knew, it was being reported everywhere that the Kings had their eyes on Acuff. They were really hoping to come away with him in the aftermath of trading Tyrese Halliburton, trading away De'Aaron Fox. Somehow the Kings were like completely guardless, or at least like young guards that could be a future piece of this franchise. And so them not having to move up, just standing pat and getting Acuff is a massive win. I really like what the Bucks did as well. They'd be my second winner. I really think there was tremendous value getting Burries at number 10. And I think getting Amen at 13 is like the exact type of upside swing you should be taking with your second first round pick. And then finally, the Grizzlies. I think the draft shook out wonderfully for them. They stayed pat at 3, ended up with Cam Boozer, who I think, like, personality wise is perfect for Memphis. Again, post Ja Morant era, he's going to be a tremendous fit there. And then they ended up picking up 5 second round picks just to move back 5 spots in the draft, because they did move back even more after they had that trade with the Thunder that I just mentioned. And they ended up with this guy Lopez, who's a Mexican player who's apparently a freak athlete that many people were high on. And they also ended up with Richie Saunders in the early second round, who was a really talented player at BYU that just ended up having his stock pushed down quite a bit because he ended up tearing his ACL last season. So those are like 3 really solid picks for Memphis, who's had tremendous success in the draft lately. So if they keep drafting like how they've been doing recently and Boozer ends up being a hit, it's not going to take that long for Memphis to end up fielding a really competitive team, even though it's looking pretty grim for the next couple of seasons here. And some quick bonus winners for you. I think the rich got a lot richer in the Thunder and the Spurs. Starting off with the Thunder, like I mentioned, they come away with Mara and Sturts in the first round of the draft. I just think for them, with how many picks they have, how many assets they have, these are truly like luxury picks. And I think it makes sense for them to take a swing on Mara, really like the only true big man in this draft, has such tremendous size at 7'3". Again, he can just be brought into the building purely to be a Wemby stopper, even though I'm not sure how that's going to work out and provide a little bit of insurance for Hartenstein. And again, I just trust their taste immensely when it comes to guards in the draft, so I'm sure Sturts will work out as well. And it is worth noting the Spurs had a couple of late first round picks, and they came away with Jaden Quintons from Kentucky, who is just a monster athlete. Looks like Kenneth Faried. Maybe it's just the hair thing and I'm falling for the aesthetic similarities, but just a monster athlete, a monster rebounder, and should be another option for the Spurs to have like a more traditional power forward alongside Carter Bryant. And then they also got some Cornet insurance later in the first round when they drafted Taurus Reed from UConn. He can't shoot. He is pretty undersized for a center, but Cornet can't shoot either, and he looked totally unplayable. So maybe somebody younger who's a better athlete, who is just another physical monster, would fit in nicely for the Spurs. So they add a lot of size as well. Now, moving on to the losers of the draft. Again, I'm not super knowledgeable about these guys, so take this with a grain of salt. But if I had to peg some losers, I would start off with the Nets. I just am not sold on the Mikel Brown Jr. pick. I feel like with the injury concerns and just the fact that Acuff was snubbed for like 2 extra picks. I mean, everybody knew that Acuff wasn't going in the top 4, but you could make really strong Acuff arguments as high as 5. But the fact that he was snubbed for those 2 extra picks at 5 and 6, I feel like that makes it like 30% more likely that Acuff is just going to be dominant with this chip on his shoulder and end up being like a discount Dame Lillard when it's all said and done. I've heard that comp before, and I really think that's a great fit based on what I've seen from Acuff. And even though the Nets took like 4 point guards in the first round of last year's draft, I think all those guys stink, to be honest with you. So screw all that. Get a guy that you can put on the posters. Get a young franchise centerpiece. Maybe Mikel Brown Jr. ends up being better than Acuff, ends up filling that role, and I look dumb, but I just didn't like them passing up on Acuff in that spot. Another loser I would have to say is probably the Dallas Mavericks, just because at number 9, like that was like the first prospect where I tried to do some research and I just wasn't the most familiar in Merez Johnson. It is just such a power move from Dusty May. You almost have to respect it that 2 days after he gets hired as the team's head coach, he immediately has the team draft his coach's pet from his previous season where Michigan obviously won the national championship. Now, all the reports I've seen since the draft are like everybody loves Merez Johnson. It looked like Mara and Lindenberg were super happy to see the guy get drafted. Apparently, he was like the engine of that team. He just plays so relentless on both ends of the court that it just is really contagious. So I get that Dusty May would want like a culture setter in the building right there, but I just felt like there was just such a heavy stretch of really special guards that were pushed down the board because of the particular draft class that they were in. I thought the Mavericks should have just gone with birdies because if you look at the keepers on the Mavericks roster in like a 5-year window, really the only one that you can have confidence in is Flag. I mean, maybe Derek Lively, but I've never been sold on his ability to recover from this foot injury. And we actually just got a report a couple hours ago that Derek Lively, he is walking, he is lifting weights, but he still isn't running, despite the fact that he suffered that foot injury basically 9 months ago. So that's really terrifying that he has not progressed that far in his rehab. He's still not playing like full speed basketball. He's not even running. That's a terrible sign for Derek Lively. So going back to the Johnson pick, I just would have liked to see them take a guard there. I think getting a young foundational guard would have served the Mavericks a little bit better, but maybe Merez Johnson ends up being the better pick. We'll have to wait and see. And then my final loser of the draft is the Pelicans because they are a really shitty team and they had no first round picks in a good draft. Now, we covered this ad nauseum around this time last year because the Pelicans decided to trade their unprotected first round pick this year just to move up basically 12 spots to get Derek Queen. So now we have the final results of that trade. And the Pelicans ended up trading away pick number 8 this year, which became Kingston Flemings, and pick number 23 last year, which ended up being Asa Newell. And in return, they got Derek Queen. And I'm not even saying that that's necessarily going to be a bad trade. Like, the process was terrible no matter what. So you can really judge the Pelicans regardless. And it'll be kind of a coin flip between Derek Queen and Flemings. I think Queen showed a lot of really cool flashes as a rookie, but he also is really flawed and an undersized big man. There's defensive concerns. There's concerns with the shot. So he just doesn't really fit the mold of what most modern successful bigs look like, but he also has like a ton of extra skills with his ability to score, with some of the moves that he has, with his passing. Like, he's just really good at all that other stuff. So I just don't know where he fits in. And Kingston Fleming does seem like more of a traditional on the ball guard that's going to be really successful in the NBA. So I would still say the Pelicans are losers just because they didn't have any swings at this year's first round, even though that they're a really shitty team. Finally, before I let you guys go, we do have some other trades and free agent signings to talk about. So we're going to run through these in the order that these deals went down. Starting off with the Thunder trading Aaron Wiggins to the Hawks for 2 second-round picks. And this is just purely a situation where the Thunder are salary dumping. They are a second apron team right now. And I think the Hawks were just around the rim at the right time because I think 2 second-round picks is a phenomenal price to pay for a guy in Aaron Wiggins who can really fill it up. He's a great shooter. He's a great scorer. He's been a really consistent bench piece for the Thunder over the past couple of seasons, and obviously was a part of a team that's been really successful, won a championship in 2025. So I'm not going to be critical of the Thunder because I completely understand why it's happening, but I think 2 second-round picks is great value for Aaron Wiggins. He just ended up becoming a bit expendable for the Thunder. He did get a lot of DNPs throughout the end of the regular season and into the playoffs. He wasn't consistently in the rotation, so makes sense from both sides. The next deal we have is pretty significant. This deal broke earlier on Monday. Trae Young signed a 4-year, $212 million extension to stay in Washington. I mean, Jesus Christ, what unbelievable work from Trae Young's agent. I think he signed a CAA. They put belt to ass to the Wizards front office in this transaction. I mean, I just don't understand how you can possibly arrive on a near max figure. Now, it is worth noting that this was somehow not a max contract extension for Trae Young. This is the exact amount that would have been max. Like, let's say the Pelicans wanted to sign Trae Young. The most that the Pelicans would have been able to offer is this exact deal, which again is 4 years, $212 million. So $53 million annually for those that aren't very good at division. But it's not the max that the Wizards could have offered Trae Young. The Wizards actually could have given him a little bit more. But this is basically a max contract. And I don't know how you can possibly arrive at that figure when there was so clearly no market, like zero market for Trae Young at the deadline. Now, maybe you can make the argument the reason there was no market for Trae Young is that you knew you were basically only renting Trae Young for a couple months. He did have some injury concerns, even though those were probably a little overblown, and you knew that the extension was coming, and that's part of the reason why teams didn't want to trade for him. But still, the Wizards only gave up CJ McCollum, and I don't want to be disrespectful of CJ, who did sign a 1 year, like $20 million deal with the Hawks, by the way. Great move from the Hawks, worth calling that out, because CJ had an awesome playoff run. At least the first couple games were awesome against the New York Knicks this past year. So CJ isn't nothing, but he's an older player. We know what CJ McCollum is. Like, there can't have been one other team in the NBA that would have been willing to offer anything close to this. And I do think it's a little bit less detrimental for the Wizards than what it would be for other teams, because if you look at the Wizards roster, it's really just Trae Young, Anthony Davis, and then all dudes who are on rookie contracts. So you do have to pay someone. There is a salary floor in the NBA that the Wizards might have been at risk of being under, I guess, if you didn't pay Trae Young. But I just think that this is insane. Like, it's terrible process. If AJ Devonta is a massive hit and Alex Sarr takes a big leap and suddenly this team is like pretty good, which isn't out of the question here, I just feel like this ruins any flexibility that you might have a couple seasons down the road, especially because this contract is backloaded, and Trae Young even has a player option in year 4. Hate to steal the Russillo joke, but I think he's going to end up picking that one up. I can say that right now. I just think that this is awful. I feel terrible for Wizards fans who finally recover from the Bradley Beal contract, which the Bradley Beal one was even worse because that one had a no trade clause, which this one doesn't. But you bounce back from that contract and you immediately basically sign Trae Young to the same exact contract minus the no trade clause. I just think it's crazy because, again, we literally saw that anyone could have had Trae Young a couple months ago and nobody wanted to take the chance on him. I do think he's better than what the trade deadline indicated. I do think he still has real juice as a playmaker. He's a really special talent. He's really not that old, so like he could definitely have years where he gets back to the same level of play like we saw a couple years ago in Atlanta. If you look at the box score stats, he was basically like 25 and 10 for multiple seasons in a row. So this guy is not a bum. And I do think the market was overly depressed on him a couple months ago. But to arrive at a max contract figure for the guy is crazy. I think 3 for 100, maybe 3 for 120 at the most would have been like plenty fair. At least you're not that committed to him like super long term. And still, like, there's a big difference between $53 million a year and 30 or $40 million a year. I think that cap savings would have given the team a lot of help in a couple years, but that's not the direction that it went. Like, I love the move to get Trae Young and Anthony Davis from the bargain bin when they made those moves at the deadline. But if they're just going to give out these ridiculous contracts to the guys and be committed to a guy that might be a depreciating asset long term for big money, I can no longer defend those trades. I just think that that's a crazy process from the Washington Wizards. So we'll see if Trae can live up to the contract. He has nothing to complain about. He does have a lot of talent around him in Washington with Coulibaly, with Keyshawn George, Debansa, Alex Sarr. Hopefully Anthony Davis finds a way they can salvage that relationship. He stays in Washington, and Washington should be a playoff team next year. That is now the expectation, especially with giving Trae Young that kind of money. So moving on to the next extension we have here, Austin Reeves signed a 4-year, $185 million maximum extension with the Lakers. And honestly, I hate to just completely flip the script here and get all soft on you, but I'm pretty happy for Austin Reeves. I did see like this photo of him reacting to the contract news when that broke the other day. And I guess he was playing golf in the offseason where he's also a phenomenal golfer. I've seen the swing and it's pretty ridiculous. And he's just like laying down on the golf course, like looking up at the sky. And you remember that this is like an undrafted player, you know what I mean? And for him to get his first real massive payday, like you knew he was going to be set for life regardless. And he was on a decent contract before this, but this is a whole new ballpark for the guy. And he is a little bit older, right? He's already 27 years old somehow. I thought he was a little bit younger than that. And there are some concerns. I don't want to act like this is guaranteed to be a home run deal for the Lakers, but he is a defensive liability at times. But it's still a much easier deal to stomach than the Trae one that we just talked about because it is less money. He is a little bit bigger than Trae Young, and he is much better off the ball, right? I think Austin Reeves is pretty malleable offensively. He can score on the ball. He can score off the ball. He's a great shooter, and you don't have to play Trey ball, like what you do if Trey Young is your guard. So I am interested to see the other moves that the Lakers make this offseason. We're all on LeBron watch and what he wants to do as an unrestricted free agent as well. And I don't know if the fit of Luka and Austin Reeves is necessarily perfect. You definitely do need another guy that can handle the ball and take some pressure off of Luka. And I think Austin Reeves is a great fit for that. The problem is like the other three guys on the court with Luka, with Austin Reeves, defensively have to be perfect and also be able to shoot the ball as well. So we'll see if the Lakers make efforts to build out that type of roster this offseason. Next move we have to talk about, this took place during the second round of the draft on Wednesday night. Isaiah Stewart was traded to Memphis for 3 future second round picks. I love this move for Memphis. It's basically a free swing to get a guy who was a great rim protector, a really good floor spacer as well. And obviously, Big Stu perfectly fits the grit and grind Memphis culture. He's also one of the most physically intimidating guys in the league. He actually needs to really work on keeping that anger in check because I think the next time he gets suspended, given all of his history and the altercation he was involved in with Jalen Duren and Moussa Diabate earlier in the season, like he's probably on like the repeat offender list. But you love how hard the guy plays. It's a great free swing for Memphis. The reason why the Pistons felt comfortable moving away from Isaiah Stewart is because Paul Reed, really out of nowhere, was significantly better, and it's also on a much cheaper contract in the playoffs. Even though Stewart was like the primary backup for Duren during the vast majority of the regular season, Reed just kind of stole his thunder in the playoffs. So the Pistons are betting that they can recreate that magic with Paul Reed, presumably being the backup for Jalen Duren next season. It also opens up a lot of cap space for the Pistons, and they are desperately trying to look for another offensive threat, preferably like a second star on offense to pair with Cade Cunningham. So we know there's going to be moves in the future for the Detroit Pistons. Windy was on the second round of the draft coverage doing the windy fingers, trying to figure out what was next for the Pistons. So we'll just have to stay tuned on that front. But I understand it from the Pistons perspective, and I like the swing for Memphis. Couple other quick contract signings and extensions to talk about here. Al Horford signed a new 2-year, $14 million deal with the Warriors. I'm happy for Al Horford. It's cool to see him run it back for, it looks like a full 2 years. It does look like this contract is fully guaranteed. So it doesn't look like there's any outs after next season. So it does look like he is not just committed for this upcoming season, but the following one after that, which is pretty impressive. He just turned 40. So he'll be 40 this season. He'll be 41 the season after. And even though LeBron's still doing it at a ridiculous level, it's not often that other players are able to last like over 20 years in the NBA. So I'm happy for Al Horford. I'm also just curious, why didn't you just stay with Boston? If you had another 3 years left in you, he's taken these team-friendly contracts. I know the Celtics had to get under the second apron last year, but I would have been open to a reunion. I'll just say that. So I'm a little butthurt he re-signed for Golden State for 2 more years. And then finally, we have some moves from the Suns to talk about here. I think they did 3 really great extensions this offseason. They got Mark Williams, 3 years, $38 million. So basically $13 million a year for Mark Williams. They got Colin Gillespie, 4 years for $48 million. So same ballpark, $12 million a year for Colin Gillespie. And then Jordan Goodwin signed a 3-year, $19 million contract to stay with the Suns. So I think that's really awesome value across the board. I probably shouldn't have been surprised at the Mark Williams contract, given his durability and given the fact that his production declined quite a bit as the season went on for the Suns. It felt like his minutes went down, the numbers went down. They felt like more comfortable turning to like Oso Ighodaro and other backup bigs during the end of the regular season, which was kind of weird. But still, Mark Williams, like the physical presence of him, he's just such a monster. He was like a highly touted prospect coming out of Duke. I thought there might have been a little bit more of a market for him, just given there's a lot of center needy teams in the NBA. So I really like the value of like basically $13 million a year for him. Gillespie was just awesome the past 2 seasons, so that feels like a really fair contract for him. And Jordan Goodwin is a really nice bench piece as well to get for basically $6 million a year there. So it doesn't really change what I think of the Suns. Obviously, I still don't really see them going anywhere. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs again next year in this Western Conference where a lot of other teams got better. But I need to, at the very least, give them a little bit of credit for these moves. And then it is worth noting we had a couple extra moves today. Jose Alvarado signed a 3-year, $14 million extension to stay in the Knicks. I think the guy has just been out on the streets of New York City celebrating the title ever since Game 5, and I can't even blame him for it. It feels like he really found his home with the Knicks. He's forever going to be a legend in New York for his contributions, even though they weren't all that much for that Knicks team. I think he's in a good spot backing up Jalen Brunson and stuff. So that's a nice little extension there for the Knicks that you feel good about. And very similar to the Aaron Wiggins trade, the Thunder also salary dumped Isaiah Joe for 2 second-round picks to the Detroit Pistons. So same type of thing. I think even after both of these moves, the Thunder are still above the second apron. So you definitely have to expect that they're going to turn down Lou Dort's player option. I'd expect him to be gone too, as the Thunder are trying to get under the second apron a little bit here and open up space for some upcoming extensions. So I think it's really great value for the Pistons to get Isaiah Joe, a guy that above all else can just shoot the hell out of the ball. He shot above 40% from three last season on a ton of attempts. So high volume, high percentage shooter, exactly what the Pistons need. He's not going to completely change the game for you, but you can confidently put him alongside Cade Cunningham and have him space the floor. So sucks that the Thunder have to give him away for salary purposes. He is a nice little rotation player, but they had to get rid of him to afford all the other guys in their roster. And I think, again, the Pistons were in the right spot at the right time. And I really like the swing on Isaiah Joe there. So that is going to do it for this podcast today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. On my next podcast, I'm sure it's going to be another really busy week in the NBA. It feels like everybody's just kind of sitting around on Jaylen Brown watch. It does still feel likely that he's going to get traded, but if there isn't a deal within the next, we'll say 2 weeks, I do expect the Celtics and Jaylen Brown to find a way to just reconcile. I hope. I'd still much rather see them just work it out and bring back Jaylen Brown rather than taking a discount on Jaylen Brown just because he was dangled in the Giannis talk. So I know I covered that a lot earlier, but we are on Jaylen watch right about now. It is worth noting that Ja Morant seems very available, and like all the betting markets are saying it's more likely that he has already played his last game in a Grizzlies uniform. I don't know the team that's going to be out there for Ja Morant. If you want to talk about Trae Young's market being depressed, I think Ja Morant is in the same exact boat, but I would actually feel better about Trae just because we've seen him make some deep playoff runs, and I trust his playmaking a little bit more at this point in time. And there are less off the court issues with Trae Young than there are with Ja Morant, to say the least. We're also on LeBron watch. I'm sure that's going to pick up as we head closer to July 1st, seeing what team he wants to sign with. I think it'll be the Lakers, but we'll have to wait and find out. And there's just a ton of more moves to be made. I mean, the Pistons, the Heat, the Lakers, many other teams with significant moves to come. So we are excited to see if there are any trades, what the free agent signings look like. So you can expect me to cover all that on my next podcast. Now, as a quick reminder, it's on June 30th when teams can officially negotiate with free agents. That's like the legal tampering period. And then the official signings start happening on July 6th. So it is going to be a busy next couple weeks in the NBA. I'm guessing that my next podcast is going to come toward the end of next week, or maybe sometime over 4th of July weekend. That's kind of what I'm thinking about, depending on the moves that go down between now and then. So that's going to do it for this podcast today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Definitely make sure you're following At Words with Wallace on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you get your podcasts. Support the show on social media as well: YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. And I will talk to you guys next week. Peace.